Hello guys, myself Manoj Sharma. Welcome to TechnoSage. So before I start up with this video, I request you to please subscribe to this channel if you haven't done it yet. So in this video, let's talk about the pivot table in Excel. So a pivot table is a special Excel tool that allows you to summarize and explore data interactively. So this is just a normal table, but if you want to show it more interactively, your data should be more expressive, you have to use the concept of pivot table in Excel. So before moving on how to create a pivot table, let's talk about what pivot and pivot table is all about. So pivot means the ability to alter the perspective of a received data. So let's suppose you are getting or receiving a data in the form of a table. So what you are doing it through pivot table is you are changing or you are altering the perspective of a received data. That means you are receiving a data called performance appraisal report. The data you will be showing is also performance appraisal report, but the look and feel and how you're presenting the data will be different. The perspective will be different. That is called as pivot. And what pivot table is all about? The ability to create a brand new table based upon the existing data for the purpose of viewing, reporting and analyzing data. So on the screen, you can see a sample table, which is a performance appraisal report. So this is having the first name and the last name, gender, date of birth, position of that respective persons, and the department in which these people are working with their respective salary and the performance rating. So let's create a sample pivot table out of it. And then we will see how data is interactively represented through pivot table. So all you need to do is select any of the cell. So we need to select any cell within this table and not the empty cell. And then you need to go to the insert tab. So on the top, you can see the insert tab is there. Under the insert tab, you will see something called pivot table. Just click onto the pivot table. It will ask you to select the table range. So you can see by default, it has selected the table. So we will either click on to new worksheet or the existing worksheet. So since I need to create a new worksheet for my pivot table, I'll click on to OK. And this will create a pivot table in a new worksheet. You can see a new worksheet is created. And if I zoom it, you can see a sample empty pivot table is created. On the right side, you can see something called pivot table fields, where I need to select the pivot field name. And once I select the field name and correspondingly I set the values under these four fields, four areas called filter, column, rows and values, my pivot table will be created. So this is basically how to create a sample pivot table. Now next is specifying pivot table data. So before creating a pivot table, you must know what you want to analyze. There are basically three questions that one has to ask themselves before proceeding up with the creation of the pivot table data or the pivot table. First is, what do you want your column headers to be? So since every table is created with the rows and columns, so first question should be, what do you want your column headers to be? Second is, what do you want your row headers to be? And third, what data you want to analyze? So if you successfully answer these three questions, you will be successfully be able to create the pivot table. So by understanding the layout, you will have a better perspective of how to create a pivot table. So first I'll go to the performance appraisal sheet and will see this table and try to analyze that in my pivot table, what column headers to be, what row headers to be, and what type of data the pivot table should hold. So after analysis, I'll again go to my pivot table sheet. I'll check the pivot names, field names, and then let's suppose I need the performance rating as the row. So I'll check for the performance rating and this should be my row. So you can see now my first row label is the performance rating. So each performance rating is associated to a salary of a particular person. So all I need to do is, so I need to get the salary under the values. So if I drag the salary under the values, so you can get the total grand value or the sum of the total salaries over here for first, second and third appraisal rating, performance rating basically. So we have the row label as first, which is, there are like three performance rating. So first performance rating, the sum of the salaries, second performance rating, the sum of salaries, third performance rating, sum of salaries, and then we have the grand total, which is sum of all the salaries. And now we will do little modification. So earlier we have kept the performance rating under row. And now what I'll do, will just drag the performance rating from rows to column, and now you see the changes. So this time what I did, I changed the performance rating to the columns, and you can see that now I have three different columns, and my row is the salary, and you can see the first column or the first rating is having the sum of the salaries. Third rating is having the sum of the salaries for all those people who are having the third performance rating, and then we have the grand total. So you can see in this way, when changing any particular value from row to column or column to row, the structure for my pivot table will also change and the representation of my data will also change. So next I will drag the position to the rows section, and you can see on the screen when I dragged it to the rows section, the position to the rows section. So my table layout has changed, where my columns are strictly the performance rating and my rows are the position. So my entire table is now created as the position in the row, and for each position, for each rating, my sum of the salaries or the salaries are listed. So here is the grand total. So the pivot table will now show the income of each position separated by the performance rating. So now let's see how we can change the pivot table calculation. So by default, if you see the values, which is basically the sum of the salaries, so it is by default in the sum state. That means whatever values I am entering, it is giving me the grand total, which is basically the sum of the salaries. If you click, if you're using the earlier version of the Excel, there will be a drop down next to the value section or for the sum of the salaries. If you're using a new version, double click to it and you will see something called pivot table fields summarized by. So you can see that by default sum is selected. If I click on any other value like count, average, max, min, I'll select average here, click on to OK. So this time you can notice that the pivot table now shows the average salary of each position and performance rating. So these are the average salaries, and here also the average for that particular column is displayed. So now let's see the very important topic of the pivot table, that is filtering and sorting a pivot table. For that, what we need to do is we need to drag the department into the filter box. Here is the department and we need to drag it to the filter box because we need to put the filter onto the department. And now you can see on the top, the department is coming with the filter option or the selection box. By default, everything is selected. I'll unselect everything and by default, I'll select just the sales one. And you can see by selecting the drop down as sales, the value for sales is just coming over here. Since you can see that this executive and senior executive are from the sales department, so only these two are listed. Now if you select any other like marketing also apart from sales, so people from marketing and sales will be selected and this will be coming out to be as multiple items selected. If I selected all, so all will be shown. If I select just accounts, so you will see accounts will be shown. So for multiple selections, there will be multiple items. For all selection, there will be all items. And for individual, the individual name will be displayed. And the member or the member belonging to that particular selection will be displayed on the pivot table. So this is how you can apply the filter in order to filter out easily the data that you want to show to your customer or you want to keep it for your reference. Now we will do one more experiment. We will drop the department from the filter to the row section and we will bring down the position below department, and this time you can see that the positions are now grouped by department. So here we have the positions and these positions are now grouped by the departments. So you can expand or collapse and can easily visualize your data. So this is basically the real visualization what I was talking about, that you can now easily visualize by grouping all your data together, by filtering all your data together or by sorting all your data together. So filtering we have seen, now we will see something called sorting. So if I click onto the row label and this time you can see under sort there will be ascending and descending. If I select ascending, so by default everything is ascending. Now if I select descending, so my entire row label will be in the descending state. Similarly for column label also, you can choose ascending or descending depending upon how you want your data to be visualized. So now that we have created the sample pivot table, now let's see how we can create a pivot chart out of the sample pivot table that we have created. So we are currently on the pivot sheet. Now all you need to do is you need to go to the analyze section, the pivot table analyze, and under the pivot table analyze, you will see an option called pivot chart. So click onto the pivot chart and by default, you will see that the data that is there as part of the pivot table, for that same data, a chart will be created. So instead of going through the pivot table itself, you can just go through the pivot chart and can easily understand or visualize your data. So now let's see how the pivot chart changes when we change the pivot chart fields. So all you need to do is just remove the department, and now we will change the performance rating from column to the row, or basically from legend to the axis. So now you can see that the data is listed based upon the position and the performance rating. Down you can check, and on the value level you can see that the average of the salaries are listed. So in this way the pivot chart also created based upon the value that you have set for your pivot table. And now you can drag and can put your pivot chart next to your pivot table for easy viewing and analysis. So this is all about pivot table in a single sentence. If I want to summarize it, it is just to explore data interactively. As I have already told you, just for explore data interactively. Now you can also see how we have changed the original data, which is basically a complete table format, into more interactive and easy format. And it is very much easy for viewing, reporting and analysis of the data. I hope you understood the pivot table in Excel. If you have any questions or concerns, please do let me know in the comment section. Please like, share and subscribe our channel. Thank you so much for watching.